1975, Australians agreed to destroy our economy so that it fitted into a new economic order, the New World Order. The Second General Conference of the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO, met in Lima, Peru from 12 March to the 26th of March 1975. The outcome of that meeting was the Lima Declaration, a blueprint for the transfer of technology, tools and jobs to third world or developing nations, leaving the developed nations such as Australia short of technology, tools and jobs. This is now a reality with around 90% of our agriculture and manufacturing jobs gone. The result, yet another third world in the making. So, what is the Lima Declaration? How does it affect you and your family? Its correct title is Lima Declaration and Plan of Action on Industrial Development and Cooperation. It is an international trade agreement similar to GATT, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. Australia is a signatory to the Lima Declaration, as it is to many GATT agreements. Australia signed the Lima Agreement with the total support of all major political parties. Whitlam, Fraser, Hawke, Keating, Hewson, Howard, Rudd, the Democrats, the Greens and the Nationals all subscribe to this type of economic genocide, albeit under different names: North-South Dialogue, GATT, Internationalism, Interdependence, International Monetary Fund, the IMF, World Bank, or the New World Order. All different names for the same plan of control of the world through the money system. Control by sick minds, treasonous politicians, and bumbling academics and bureaucrats. It should be clearly understood that the Lima Declaration is one of many hundreds of international agreements and treaties signed by Australia, usually by one man, the Minister for Foreign Affairs or his nominee, who signs on behalf of all Australians. In 1975, that man was Senator Don Willacy. It should be clearly understood that 99% of Australians do not know what such agreements and treaties are about, nor how they affect their lives, and they are not told deliberately, because if they were, there would be riots in the streets. This video deals very briefly with just one of hundreds of agreements and treaties between the UN and Australia, the United Nations Lima Declaration of 1975. International treaties in the main are the handiwork of the United Nations and have been used by Australian governments to undermine Australian sovereignty. The High Court decision on the Franklin Dam issue in Tasmania is a case in point, used to put in place processes, the impact of which the Australian people are completely unaware, and if they were aware, would be totally opposed to processes that get around the Australian Commonwealth Constitution. In other words, treason. And treason is being committed in the name of international treaty, or the other names given to them such as conventions, or in this case declaration, the Lima Declaration. You may say treason is a strong word, but after viewing this video, you will say it is not strong enough, without doubt sufficient reason to impeach the Australian government and opposition on charges of treason. So, how did our governments give effect to the Lima Declaration? Simply, the Lima Declaration is an agreement to wind down Australian manufacturing by around 30% and to import that amount from other preferred countries together with as much primary produce as we can consume, such as fruit, meat, etc. The 30% was a target that is now blown out. Current estimates are that 90% of our production capacity is gone and our jobs with it. There is no mention in the agreement about what will happen to Australians who lose their jobs, their factories or their farms. It appears they are expendable. How can a government wind down business activity? Simply by making an unlevel playing field. Increase taxes, interest rates, the cost of employing people, without the worker gaining any benefit of course, environmental planning and controls, all of these things in combination either destroy or decrease our ability to produce. A good example would be, if you wish to manufacture widgets in Sydney, you may require, say, 5 acres of industrial land at around $12 million, on which you will pay $25,000 a year rates and $25,000 land tax. It will cost some hundreds of thousands in contributions to council coffers and environmental studies, all of which you may borrow at high interest. Then, if you are lucky, you will be up and manufacturing in maybe 2 to 5 years. Then the unions will step in and cause loss of production. The government will make you subject to time-consuming unnecessary costs, paperwork, insurance and payroll tax, and force you to collect sales tax on your product, and threaten you with heavy penalties including jail sentences for non-compliance. Or, You can simply set up business offshore and export your ideas back to Australia. Our offshore neighbour, also a party to the Lima Declaration, will give you the land, assist you in every way and not tax you for the first 5 years. Their interest may range from 0 to 4%, not to mention the Australian government's incentives available to importers from preferred countries. And so the playing field is drastically tilted to get the result required by a combination of government and financial activities. So, how does the Lima Declaration affect you? Simple. 50% of the productive Australian workforce becomes unemployed. Taxes on the remaining people employed increase to pay for the unemployed. With new shortage of income, you are forced to buy cheaper imports or go without, thereby aggravating the spiral of well-planned economic transfer equals oppression. Government will increase their numbers to cover up the real unemployment statistics and/or change the definition of unemployed. If you work 10 hours a month, you will be considered employed. We now have more people in government at all levels with little to do, other than think up ways of controlling those who are left to produce what little we don't import, thinking up new revenue raising schemes and raising penalties to ensure their salaries. And last but not least, the obscure reason behind the Lima Declaration. Australia becomes a dependent nation, dependent on other nations for shoes, its machinery, its food, its survival. There is no doubt that within the grand plan of international control, there is no room for self-sufficient nations. Any nation that has all the material it needs and can grow all the food and fibre it needs cannot be totally controlled by any international body such as the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, or the World Bank. An independent nation, independent in its production of all the things it needs, cannot be brought to heel by sanctions, such as happened in South Africa and Iraq. The international monetary control cannot starve the infants of an independent nation, nor deny them medication, as they did in Iraq. If Australia cannot make its own shoes, clothes and machinery, then others will control us. That is the real purpose of the Lima Declaration, and that is why those who support the Lima Declaration, including those in influential positions, are all traitors. The following are some of the recommendations of the Lima Declaration. A new economic order by which complete control of the world and its people is planned through the total control of their economy, their means of existence. The basic economy I refer to is people. People create the need is then supplied by people's activity. All that is required for economic growth is for people to supply their own market. The proposed new economic order is not about developing third world countries' economies for the benefit of their people. It's about developing for the establishment's benefit, our would-be masters, the would-be masters of the new world order. It is an absolute nonsense to say that a country needs to export to survive and prosper. Of course, one must export an equal amount to which one imports to balance trade. But the less it imports, the less it needs to export to effect the offset. What is required is a locally owned and controlled credit system, the essential ingredient in remaining independent of international finance, the exact opposite to the plans of the New World Masters. Every country should work toward import replacement, which is exactly the opposite of the strategy set out in the Lima Declaration and exactly the opposite to the current policy of export, export, export. Currently, Australia exports below the cost of production. Therefore, the more we export, the more we go broke. If the fundamentals on which the Lima Declaration is purported to be built were half correct, our world would have to carry out export-import trade with another world in export to survive. This is quite obviously nonsense. The whole world will continue to fall for this treachery while ever the man in the street remains as a mushroom under the spell of bankers' trickery and that of the stooges who fill both elected and public service positions on all sides of politics. The new economic order is mentioned no less than 21 times in the Lima Agreement. That is what the Lima Agreement is about. Locking the new developing countries into their economic trap and their plans for total world economic control, at the same time reducing developed countries to third world status, clamping the shackles of international debt on every human being, bringing about total world slavery and the legally enforceable shackles of debt chained to the slave master, money power. Every Australian is immediately required to make a decision between debt-controlled slavery in perpetuity or the age of prosperity. Both are eminently possible. One we will have, but which one?